They provoke you because they need you to react, not because they hate you, not because they misunderstand you, but because your reaction gives them something they do not possess: control. Most conflicts are not battles of truth. They are battles of emotional leverage. The first person who reacts loses position. The first person who explains surrenders authority. The first person who defends themselves has already accepted the accusation as worthy of debate. This is why silence unsettles people. When you do not react, the script they prepared for you collapses. When you do not explain, they are forced to confront their own uncertainty. When you ignore, you remove the fuel from their strategy. Human beings are not as rational as they appear. They are driven by status anxiety, insecurity, territorial instinct, and the primitive fear of losing relevance. Every insult, every passive-aggressive remark, every attempt to bait you is rarely about facts. It is about testing hierarchy. They want to know where you stand in the invisible ladder, and they test you through irritation. If you react emotionally, you signal that their opinion has penetrated you. That is submission. If you rush to clarify yourself, you signal that their misunderstanding threatens you. That is insecurity. If you argue, you reveal that you need to win in order to feel stable. That is weakness. Power does not argue. Power observes. Most people are trapped in a cycle of compulsive self-justification. They explain themselves to feel safe. They defend themselves to preserve identity. They react because their ego interprets silence as defeat. But silence is not defeat. It is a weapon. When someone criticizes you publicly and you remain still, something interesting happens. The room becomes uncomfortable. People instinctively look for your reaction. They expect tension. They expect retaliation. When it does not come, uncertainty spreads. The aggressor suddenly feels exposed. Why? Because aggression requires resistance to justify itself. Without resistance, it appears excessive, and excessive behavior reveals insecurity. Ignoring someone who attempts to provoke you forces them into self-reflection. They begin questioning whether they miscalculated. They wonder if you know something they do not. They feel the absence of control. Silence creates psychological vacuum, and the human mind cannot tolerate vacuum. It fills it with doubt. The first principle is restraint, not emotional suppression, strategic restraint. There is a difference. Suppression is reactive. Restraint is chosen. Suppression feels tight, unstable, ready to burst. Restraint is calm because it is deliberate. When you never react impulsively, you become unreadable. And what cannot be read cannot be easily manipulated. People manipulate through prediction. They observe your triggers. They learn what angers you, what flatters you, what embarrasses you. Once they map your emotional patterns, they can guide your behavior like pulling invisible strings. If you remove predictable reactions, the strings detach. The second principle is selective invisibility. Attention is currency. When you reward bad behavior with attention, even negative attention, you validate it. Ignoring someone is not about pretending they do not exist. It is about refusing to reinforce their strategy. This unsettles them because human beings fear irrelevance more than criticism. Criticism still acknowledges presence. Indifference erases it. That is why being ignored feels heavier than being insulted. When you choose not to respond to gossip, the gossip eventually consumes itself. When you do not defend against minor accusations, the accuser often escalates irrationally, exposing their desperation. Escalation without resistance appears unstable. Stability wins silently. The third principle is controlled ambiguity. Most people overshare to reduce anxiety. They clarify their intentions to avoid misunderstanding. They reveal their plans to gain approval. This makes them predictable. Ambiguity, when controlled, creates space for projection. People begin projecting their fears and assumptions onto you. They imagine motives. They overanalyze your silence. They attribute strategy where there may simply be patience. Ambiguity increases perceived depth, and perceived depth creates caution. The fourth principle is emotional neutrality in the face of praise. Flattery is another form of manipulation. When someone praises you excessively, they are often testing your need for validation. If you visibly absorb it, they learn how to influence you. Remain the same under praise as you are under insult. unmoved. Consistency destabilizes manipulators because they rely on emotional spikes to anchor their influence. The fifth principle is delayed response. Immediate replies reveal urgency. Urgency reveals emotional investment. When you respond slowly, not carelessly, but deliberately, you signal that your internal world is not governed by external pressure. People who cannot tolerate delayed responses are often driven by insecurity. They interpret silence as rejection because they measure value through constant affirmation. You do not owe constant affirmation. The sixth principle is controlled disengagement. When a conversation becomes circular, emotional, or strategically pointless, exit without spectacle. Do not announce your withdrawal. Do not justify it. Simply reduce energy. Energy is dominance. The person who invests more emotional energy into a conflict is usually the one seeking validation. The person who invests less appears higher in the hierarchy. And hierarchy, even in modern society, still governs behavior. The seventh principle is indifference to misunderstanding. This is the most difficult. Humans have a deep need to be understood. It is rooted in survival. In early tribal systems, being misunderstood could mean exclusion. Exclusion meant death. That instinct still lives inside you. When someone misrepresents you, your nervous system reacts as if social exile is imminent. You feel the urge to correct the narrative immediately. But not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Sometimes allowing someone to misunderstand you is a test of your internal stability. If your identity depends on universal approval, you are easy to control. When you internalize these principles, something changes. You begin to see how often people are baiting unconsciously. Their sarcasm is insecurity disguised as humor. Their criticism is projection of their own self-doubt. Their attempts to rush you are reflections of their internal chaos. You stop personalizing behavior. You start analyzing it. Most aggression is a request for reassurance. Most manipulation is a response to fear. Most hostility is insecurity searching for dominance. Understanding this removes emotional charge. But there is a warning. Silence is powerful only when it is backed by competence. Ignoring without substance becomes avoidance. Refusing to explain without results becomes arrogance. Emotional neutrality without awareness becomes detachment. The strength comes from internal discipline. You must be capable of defending yourself, but choose not to. You must be able to argue, but see no value in it. You must understand the game, but refuse to play at lower levels. That is the difference between weakness and control. When people realize they cannot provoke you, they change strategy. Some will withdraw. Some will intensify. Some will attempt subtle forms of sabotage. Expect this, because when you stop reacting, you remove the easiest access point to your influence. Observe carefully how relationships shift when you become less reactive. Those who relied on your emotional responses will feel destabilized. Those who respect strength will adjust and become more measured. You begin to filter your environment without confrontation. The quiet often rises in hierarchy, not because they speak louder, but because they speak less. Words lose value when overused. Silence increases weight. When you finally choose to speak, it carries density. And this is what unsettles people the most. Unpredictability combined with calm. If you are explosive, they can anticipate it. If you are overly agreeable, they can exploit it. If you are consistently calm, emotionally stable, and selectively responsive, they cannot easily categorize you. The human brain seeks patterns. When it cannot find one, it becomes cautious. Caution is respect's older brother. There will be moments when your silence is interpreted as weakness. Let it be. Perception often reveals more about the observer than the observed. Time exposes strength more reliably than immediate defense. History quietly favors those who conserve energy. Control of self precedes control of circumstance. If you cannot govern your reaction to a sentence, you will struggle to govern anything larger. Every ignored provocation strengthens your internal authority. Every withheld explanation builds resilience against external validation. Every measured response sharpens your psychological position. Over time, people will stop testing you, not because they like you, but because they sense resistance without friction. There is something unnerving about a person who does not flinch. A person who does not rush to clarify. A person who does not chase resolution. A person who does not react to minor disrespect. Such a person appears grounded in something deeper than opinion, and depth is intimidating. Most people exhaust themselves trying to win arguments that do not matter. They seek closure where there is none. They explain themselves to those committed to misunderstanding them. You do not need to win every narrative. You need to maintain position. Position is preserved through composure. In the end, the greatest manipulation is not controlling others. It is controlling your own impulses so completely that others lose access to them. When you no longer react automatically, you become strategic. When you no longer explain compulsively, you become autonomous. When you can ignore without bitterness, you become untouchable. People reveal themselves in your silence. They reveal how much they need reaction. They reveal how uncomfortable they are with uncertainty. They reveal the fragility behind their aggression. And you learn something colder than motivation. You learn that most battles were invitations, not necessities. You were never required to attend. The final realization is this: the person who controls their reaction controls the frame. The person who controls the frame controls perception. And the person who controls perception rarely needs to fight. Silence is not absence, it is positioning. And once you understand that, you will begin to notice something subtle. The loud ones argue. The insecure ones explain. The desperate ones react. The powerful ones watch. They watch, and in watching, they gather leverage. Observation is not passive. It is accumulation. Every careless word spoken in frustration, every emotional display offered in haste, every defensive explanation volunteered without necessity becomes data. And data, in the hands of someone patient, becomes advantage. Most people speak to relieve internal pressure. They react to discharge discomfort. They explain to quiet anxiety. Their behavior is not strategic. It is therapeutic. They are managing their emotions in public. This is why restraint feels unnatural at first. You are resisting the impulse to self-soothe through expression. You are allowing discomfort to exist without anesthetizing it with words. That alone places you ahead of most. Consider how quickly people rush to defend their reputation. Reputation is a social construct, fragile, unstable, dependent on collective perception. The fear of losing it triggers primitive survival alarms. When someone questions your competence or your integrity, the body interprets it as threat. The instinct is immediate correction. But immediate correction reveals fear of loss, and fear is readable. When you remain still under accusation, something subtle happens. You signal that your identity is not dependent on the momentary opinion of others. You communicate that your internal foundation is not shaken by temporary narratives. That steadiness disturbs those who rely on social turbulence to gain advantage. There is a reason why the calmest individual in a heated room often appears dominant, even if they say nothing. Emotional stillness creates contrast. And contrast defines hierarchy. When others escalate, you de-escalate internally. When they attempt to provoke urgency, you slow your tempo. When they demand explanation, you offer silence. This reversal disrupts expectation. Human interaction is built on prediction loops. We anticipate response based on stimulus. Insult expects retaliation. Praise expects gratitude. Pressure expects reaction. When the expected loop breaks, cognitive dissonance emerges. Dissonance creates doubt. Doubt weakens the aggressor's confidence in their strategy. Over time, people begin recalibrating around you. They become more cautious in their tone. They measure their words more carefully. They test less frequently, not because you threatened them, but because unpredictability combined with composure forces adaptation. There is another layer to this discipline that few understand. When you refuse to explain yourself to those who are not genuinely seeking understanding, you filter your environment. Those who require constant access to your reasoning will drift away. Those who respect boundaries will remain. Silence becomes a sorting mechanism. You begin to notice who becomes agitated when you withdraw energy. Agitation reveals dependency. Dependency reveals imbalance. And imbalance is leverage. You do not exploit it recklessly. You simply become aware of it. Most manipulation is subtle. It hides in urgency. It hides in emotional appeals. It hides in moral framing. Someone tells you that you owe them an explanation because it is fair. Someone demands immediate clarity because it is respectful. Someone insists on reaction because it is honest. But examine the structure beneath the language. Fairness often masks control. Respect often masks expectation. Honesty often masks emotional pressure. When you detach from these linguistic disguises, you see intent rather than words. Intent is what matters. If someone truly seeks understanding, they approach calmly. They allow space. They tolerate delay. If someone seeks control, they escalate. They push. They frame your silence as guilt. Do not be fooled by framing. Framing is an attempt to dictate interpretation. If they can convince you that silence equals weakness, they gain advantage. If they can convince you that explanation equals virtue, they guide your behavior. But interpretation is yours. You choose what your silence means. There will be moments when your restraint is misunderstood as indifference. That is acceptable. Indifference is often more stabilizing than constant reassurance. You are not obligated to regulate the emotional states of others. In fact, the more you attempt to regulate others, the less you regulate yourself. Control begins internally. When you master the ability to observe your own impulse to react, the tightening in your chest, the surge of defensiveness, the subtle desire to retaliate, and you do nothing, you experience a shift. You realize that reaction is optional. Optional behavior is controlled behavior. Controlled behavior accumulates authority. Authority without announcement is the most unsettling form. It does not need validation. It does not demand agreement. It does not seek applause. It simply persists. There is danger in this path. If misapplied, silence becomes avoidance. If driven by fear rather than strategy, it becomes suppression. The difference lies in awareness. Are you silent because you are afraid to speak, or because speaking would reduce your position? The disciplined individual knows the answer before choosing. Never react does not mean never respond. It means never surrender your emotional center to someone else's instability. Never explain does not mean conceal truth. It means do not waste clarity on those committed to distortion. Just ignore does not mean disengage from reality. It means disengage from manipulation. Most conflicts are invitations to descend. You decline. You conserve energy for arenas that matter. Watch how often people attempt to provoke you not to solve a problem, but to create emotional equivalence. If they feel insecure, they want you unsettled. If they feel small, they want you defensive. If they feel exposed, they want you reactive. Emotional contagion is their strategy. Containment is yours. When you refuse contagion, you isolate instability to its source. The other person must then confront their own emotion without your participation. That confrontation is uncomfortable. Many will retreat rather than endure it. And slowly, your presence begins to carry weight without effort. Because you are no longer available for trivial exchanges. Because you are no longer predictable in conflict. Because you are no longer accessible through ego. The room senses this before it understands it. They begin choosing words carefully around you. They hesitate before testing you. They sense that emotional theatrics will not penetrate, not because you are cold, but because you are disciplined. And discipline at this level is rare. Rare qualities attract both respect and resistance. Some will admire your composure. Others will resent it. Resentment often comes from those who cannot govern themselves. Your stability highlights their instability. You must be prepared for quiet hostility, not overt attacks but subtle distancing, not open conflict but restrained tension. When people cannot move you emotionally, they may attempt to exclude you socially. This is another test. If your silence is dependent on approval, exclusion will trigger reaction. If your discipline is rooted internally, exclusion will not destabilize you. And that is the final layer most never reach. True power is not in making others react. It is in becoming immune to the need for reaction yourself. When you reach that point, something changes in your perception. You stop seeing provocations as threats. You see them as information. You stop seeing insults as attacks. You see them as projections. You stop seeing urgency as importance. You see it as anxiety. And once you see clearly, manipulation loses its mystery. There is no need to dominate loudly, no need to crush opposition, no need to explain your every move. You remain composed. You remain selective. You remain unreadable. And in that unreadability, you become difficult to control. Most people fear confrontation. Few understand that the greater danger is emotional exposure. When your reactions are accessible, you are negotiable. When your impulses are predictable, you are steerable. When your silence is chosen, you are sovereign. Eventually, you will realize that the greatest victory was not winning arguments. It was stepping outside the arena entirely. It was refusing to compete for validation. It was conserving your internal order while others dissolved into noise. The world is full of voices demanding reaction. Very few can tolerate stillness. Become one of them, and you will notice something unsettling. The louder they become, the quieter you grow. The more they explain, the less you need to. The more they react, the more stable you appear. In the end, power does not belong to the one who speaks the most. It belongs to the one who cannot be moved without consent. In the end, this was never about silence as performance. It was about sovereignty. Most people spend their lives negotiating for emotional territory they already own. They defend themselves in rooms that were never courts. They explain themselves to judges who were never qualified to evaluate them. They react to provocations that were designed only to measure their instability. And in doing so, they surrender something far more valuable than reputation. They surrender authorship of their own state. When you refuse to react impulsively, you reclaim authorship. When you refuse to explain yourself to those committed to misunderstanding, you reclaim authorship. When you ignore manipulation without bitterness, you reclaim authorship. You are no longer participating in someone else's frame. You are building your own. This does not make you liked. It does not make you understood. It does not make you comfortable. It makes you stable, and stability is rarer and more intimidating than charisma. Over time, people will adjust around your stillness. Some will step closer, recognizing strength. Others will step away, unsettled by the absence of leverage. Let them sort themselves. You were never responsible for managing the insecurity of others. The real shift happens quietly. One day you notice that insults do not enter you. Urgency does not infect you. Praise does not intoxicate you. Misunderstanding does not destabilize you. You observe. You choose. You move only when it serves you. And in that restraint, you become difficult to read, difficult to provoke, difficult to control. Not because you are hardened, but because you are governed. The loud will continue to argue. The insecure will continue to explain. The impulsive will continue to react. You will not. And that is the difference they will feel but never fully understand. Most people consume information the way they consume entertainment. They listen, they nod, they feel momentarily sharper, and then they return to their old patterns. Discipline is not built through exposure. It is built through repetition. If you found yourself uncomfortable while listening, that is not an accident. Discomfort means something was recognized, and recognition fades quickly when it is not reinforced. You can walk away now and let the noise of the world dilute what you've just understood. Most will. Or you can make a deliberate decision to keep refining the way you think, to sharpen perception, to strengthen restraint, to see manipulation before it reaches you. Subscribing is not support. It is alignment. It is a quiet signal that you prefer awareness over impulse, that you value clarity over comfort, that you are willing to continue training your mind instead of letting it drift. No pressure, no persuasion, only a choice. Remain reactive like the majority, or stay close to ideas that make you harder to control.